Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a quick little discussion, another Know Your Unit episode on Tactics Ogre Knight of Lodis, specifically today on the Archer. Now, these guys are my favorite little underdogs as far as this game is concerned, because man, they got shafted hard by whoever designed them. It's just plain unfair, and so to that end, I wanted to go ahead and discuss this with a bunch of needlessly dramatic music over here in the background. Also, might have been on a little bit of a outbreak kick lately, but anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the Archer. So here's the deal. Oftentimes this is a unit that we make fun of, but we don't exactly know what happened with these guys. It feels like they're a downgrade to absolutely everything in the game, and yet as with everything else, it's unclear as to why that even happens. It's not like their growths are necessarily that awful. Like, they are on the lower end, sure, but like stats-wise, they're mostly just on the lower end. They should still have other redeeming qualities, right? They do still have a weapon specialization, surely that should do something. They do still have other things that they can potentially specialize in, surely that should do something. But there was one crucial detail that was kind of lingering out there in the background. Admittedly, this is one of those things that I kind of have to go and turn to the modders for this game for, because Knight of Lodis is a little bizarre in that it went unbelievably hard in the background mechanics for absolutely no logical reason whatsoever. And like famously, we have the old biorhythm system where there's just an entire algorithm that determines how people's daily luck works, and their emblems determine how their overall luck goes in their life and everything else. And it's like, nobody's ever gonna need this. There's like 20 reachable drop tiles that you're gonna possibly ever reach throughout the entire course of a playthrough. Who put so much work into this? But in the case of the Archer, it turns out that what they're actually getting shafted by is part of the rubber banding mechanic. Now, with Knight of Lodis, one of those things to remember is that every unit is essentially always going to be leaning towards their particular skills, or rather their particular kind of role, as it were. So, like, even if a unit, let's say, has a bunch of emblems that make them particularly strong, if they are switching over to a stronger class, they still will remain stronger. No matter how many offensive emblems you give to a witch, they're not going to be as good of a powerhouse as somebody with lower stats, but a more appropriate class. So a lot of that is in the background. It's not necessarily explained too much, or at all for that matter. And there are still, obviously, ways that you could make stuff work. For example, if you wanted to use archers, who at this point I choose to believe had dumped all of their stat points straight into that kick-ass hat, if you wanted to use archers effectively, it's actually very simple. You pair them with a witch. If you want to consistently see them remain good throughout the entire game, just pair them with a witch, pair them with a warlock, just anybody that can use an influence skill, boosts their particular element, and they're actually pretty solid damage dealers. Now, there's a few different unknowns here, and one of those unknowns is actually what weapon specialization even does. Now, personally, in my testing, it seemed roughly like a 4 damage increase, and potentially maybe a little bit of a higher crit chance, but that's impossible to confirm as far as I'm aware. When I was talking to folks on the modding end, they didn't see anything that stuck out. They're not convinced that even that 4 damage thing exists. I know personally I thought I confirmed that at some point, but I can't remember how, so who knows? It might do some minor thing and or nothing at all aside from a cool animation. Unclear. But the part where the Archer gets screwed, the part where it gets noticeably frustrating, is going back to that rubber banding thing. Because for some reason, the Archer essentially receives a 1-tile movement bonus. I think it was 1 tile. Let's go ahead and compare that real quick. They get a movement bonus compared with a soldier. So they do move reasonably farther. They get a 1-tile movement bonus basically for free regardless of weight, so that's a pretty noticeable benefit. But on top of that, they also, and unfortunately it's not as much as the ninja, which is again hilarious because they have very similar requirements. Like in the case of the ninja there, strength 36, agility 37. In the case of the archer, you need just agility 37, which realistically you'll get strength at that same time anyway. So they're like just a worse ninja in every possible way. But they're one of the few classes that comes in just like the casters with a negative physical modifier. They are literally permanently 10% debuffed, I think it was. It was either 10 or 15% debuffed on all of their physical attacks compared with the spellcasters. In fact, one of the weird quirks of the system that somebody was explaining to me is why a knight is actually a better spellcaster using items than a dragoon is, and why they're potentially better than some actual spellcaster classes, or why, what's her face? Abused child lady, whose name I am Euphry, why she's essentially a really good physical attacker despite being a caster. And it's basically that secondary rubber banding layer where people are scaling towards where they're supposed to be. So yeah, now you know. They permanently get like 10 to 15% negative on their physical attacks, which means that just like in something like Reborn, you can bypass that using elements. However, you don't have to attack their weaker element. You just use, like in this case, if you started with Sierra, you give her Hanella's influence, and they're honestly going to be pretty darn solid. They use that extra tile of movement to get into position. They're going to be pretty darn oppressive. In fact, if you decide to really scale the test in your favor, you can, for example, take Mr. Dude Guy over here. You can go ahead and change him over to a cleric, give him, a melee weapon despite being a cleric, and then you go ahead and have Sierra over here with, I think it was 3 stacks of Hanella's influence, and then at that point, she actually can convincingly outfight Mr. Dabudi over here, despite him being, well, the main character and stuff. Now, sure, that is a lot of things in their favor, but with enough influence, honestly, it overcomes a lot of their weaknesses, so that is kind of the main go-to here. Molten Blade, as well as influence, you're going to be off to a pretty good time. So yeah, that's pretty much about it as far as useful tricks to make this character good. The class literally only gets an extra tile of movement and specialization in bows for whatever it actually does. Even after over a decade of playing this game and talking with people that have modified it, here, there, and everywhere, no actual clue on what weapon specialization actually does, aside from give them a cool animation. So, anyway, that'll be about that. I hope this was useful for you. Yeah, these Night of Lodis ones are generally going to be pretty short because these classes are oftentimes more style than mechanics. So, I think the one that's the most mechanically dense is the Dragoon, just because he gets the kill moves. But yeah, that's kind of about that. And realistically, whenever you get Lachesis down the line, you're almost never going to give it to your generic starting archer. So then, not really much of a conversation there. Anyway, so that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and see ya.